Turn up the volume and please take a look at this. It is the scene that played out in the streets of Dallas last night after former police officer Amber Guyger was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the murder of her black neighbor, Botham Jean. Guyger fatally shot Jean after she entered his apartment thinking it was her own and that he was an intruder. He was sitting on the couch eating ice cream. That scene that you saw in the street is very different from the one that played out inside the courtroom, where the victim's brother took the stand to tell Guyger that he forgives her. And he went one step further.
I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
Talk about grace, talk about mercy. My goodness. Joining us now to discuss, Mark Claxton, retired NYPD detective and director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance. Eddie Glaude, professor at Princeton University, and Danny Savalas, MSNBC analyst. Eddie, I'm so glad you're with me today. As soon as I saw that video, you were the first person I wanted to call. It wasn't just a hug, though. After the sentencing, the judge also walked over and gave Amber Guyger a Bible, and he embraced her. What's your reaction, what is your reaction to the sentence and the scene that played out in the courtroom?
Well, I think the sentence reflects a systemic problem within our system, our criminal justice system, Stephanie. She got 10 years. With good behavior, she will do 5 for killing someone. Put this in perspective. Crystal Mason, for voter fraud in Texas, got 5 years. Tanya McDowell, for trying to send her kid to a school that was out of her district, got 5 years. And so it could be the case that Amy Guyger will only serve 5 years for the murder of Botham Jean. So that, I think, wherever you stand, I think something is wrong with the way the criminal justice system works with white people and black people. I think that's just very clear. But in terms of Brett Jean's response, Stephanie, it was an expression of profound grace. It was his expression of his faith. And I think also it's an expression of self-care. So he exemplified what it means to be a Christian. And today, white evangelical Christians needed to see that. So he exhibited what it means to truly follow Christ. But it's also an expression of self-care because he has to do the work of keeping that hate from taking root in his soul. Because hate is corrosive. And so he has to do that work. We saw it in Charlottesville with the families whose family members were murdered by Dylan Roof. You have to do that work. And as black Americans, we've had to do that work for generations so that we can get up in the morning because the hate can literally overwhelm. So it was an expression of profound grace and profound self-care in a moment where the country needs to see both.
Danny, from a legal perspective, there's been a lot of mixed reactions to the sentence. Does 10 years surprise you?
Yes and no. Texas has a sentencing scheme for this particular crime.
Then you're right in there with the mixed.
I am. It is mixed because Texas has a sentencing scheme that gave the jury or the sentencing court discretion to sentence between 5 and 99 years. That's not a lot of guidance. Plus, with this defendant, you look at the traditional factors in sentencing. She doesn't have any prior criminal history. This is not a case where somebody laying in wait and waited for somebody or killed them with poison or some other torture or something like that. This was a split-second decision that was a bad decision, and the jury decided it was murder. But when it came time to sentence, they decided for whatever reason she's not in the category of defendants that deserve 99 years or even 50 years. And generally, murder sentences are a lot higher. But that's why Texas gives juries and courts that kind of range from 5 to 99 years and that kind of discretion.
Mark, Guyger's lawyers argued that she was not racist, that it had nothing to do with race, but she came under fire for multiple text messages that were revealed during the sentencing hearing. In one of those, she was talking to another police officer about working with black officers, and she wrote this: not racist, but just have a different way of working, and it shows. Do you think this represents a larger problem with law enforcement across the country not realizing their inherent bias?
Oh, it definitely is. There is a larger problem, and I think her statements are indicative of that larger problem. And I think in many ways that's why throughout the nation there are agencies and departments that are engaging in implicit bias training. Now, we can debate or argue about the effectiveness of that training, but I think what's important to note is that there is a recognition from many people that baked into criminal justice and into policing is bias. It's the bias that exists in many cultures, the bias that exists in general life, the bias that exists in civilian life is baked into policing, and many of the incidents that are tragic, that are well-known incidents are based in part on implicit or explicit bias and the imbalances that police officers engage in when dealing with particularly people of color.
Eddie, what do you make of that split screen? On one hand, you have the brother of the victim saying, "I love you," forgiving Amber Guyger, hugging her. And on the other side, you've got protesters taking to the streets, shouting about how race and privilege impact everything, including murder convictions.
Well, Stephanie, there's no contradiction between an expression of one's faith and a desire for accountability. So as Brett John expressed his undying love for Christ, and he did it in forgiving Amy Guyger, there was still the demand that Amy Guyger be held accountable for her actions in a way that was just and fair. What was interesting is in Jean's testimony, he sounded like a prison abolitionist. He said he didn't even want her to go to jail. So this is not a matter about giving her a harsher sentence. Where you stand on the issue is that you just want justice, right? And so I think it's important for us to see that there's a moment where you can express one's faith in the way that Jean exemplified, and at the same time express one's anger. There was no judge who hugged Tamir Rice's mama. There was no judge who paid attention to what was going on with Tanya McDowell. There was no judge who actually spoke to the differential between Felicity Huffman getting 14 days and that woman getting 5 years. And so it makes sense that people can be angry about the systemic unfairness in our criminal justice system, and yet, exhibit profound grace and love in a moment of tragedy.
Well, Eddie, you are talking about it, and you're making us smarter because of it. Danny, do you think this case and the sentence could set a new precedent for fatal police shootings in this country?
No. Because even though fatal police shootings have been a problem for a long time in this country, in many ways, this case was an outlier when it comes to fatal police shootings, which normally happen in a tour of duty where the police make a decision to pull someone over, and there are facts that suggest that they may not have pulled that person over if the circumstances were different. This is a case, and it struck fear into the heart of everyone, which is the idea that no matter who you are, you could be sitting at home eating ice cream, and the police could kick open your door and not even give you a chance to drop your ice cream.
But she
that's
also
the kind of fear.
I mean, she was acting as a private citizen, and that's how she was behaving. So should we even look at this, Mark? Should we look at this case in the broader spectrum of how we address these types of shootings when it wasn't like she was an on-duty police officer who maybe took out her gun too quickly? She was an individual who opened a front door and shot a man.
There are many elements that need to be examined in this case. If you deal with or examine the disparate treatment, the sentencing, the selective manner in which this case was prosecuted, the attempt by the defense to introduce the Castle Doctrine, stand your ground when, in fact, former Officer Guyger was in someone else's home, and they attempted to apply stand your ground. If you look at her ultimate sentence of 10 years, which will ultimately be 5 years, etc. There are so many things wrapped up in this one case. But do I think that this is a changing moment for law enforcement as far as implicit bias and treatment and disparate treatment? No, I do not. Do I believe that there are elements that need to be examined in this particular case? Absolutely. But it's nothing unusual, as Eddie Glaude said quite clearly. there exists a disparate and a double standard in the system. It's baked into the system itself, and this decision and the elements behind this decision will not change that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.